Hi, everyone. Welcome to ACLU Vermont's Working from Hope and Building Power. My name is Jess Venable Novak. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Advocacy and Outreach Manager at the ACLU of Vermont. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Super excited to be here with you all and to really dig in to our content. So I know to some folks I might be a new face, but hopefully others I'm a familiar face. I joined the ACLU team back in September, but have been living and working in Vermont for some time. So again, just super grateful to be here with you all. And I am joined by a few of my colleagues and teammates. So Falco Schilling, our advocacy director, is here with us, and Indy Schoenherr, our policy advocate. And Indy and Falco are going to take us through moments of looking back on the work that we've done, all the work that the ACLU team, our volunteers, and our supporters, so all of you on this call, have achieved in the past year. We're excited to celebrate all of that and to kind of do a look back at this important moment in our year, because we also have a lot to look forward to, right? We're going to be looking ahead at the different issue areas that we're going to be digging into and our priorities for this upcoming legislative session. But before we get to all of that, I just want to give you a peek into some of the other things we're going to be doing tonight. So we're also going to be taking the opportunity to take some action together, because we want to make sure that you all stay connected to the ACLU and the work that we'll be doing moving forward. We're also going to have time for discussion and questions, which is super important. So, be thinking if you have any questions right now off the bat. I know some folks submitted questions when you registered, and then you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions later in the program. And then we're going to wrap up the night with a little swag bag giveaway. So we're going to randomly select one lucky participant to be gifted an ACLU Vermont swag bag. So stay with us through the end of the program. I really think it's going to be a quick and interesting evening. So before we dive in, I want to just do a few housekeeping things. So in case folks haven't noticed, everyone's mics and cameras are off. So that means that you can sit back and listen. Maybe you're starting dinner, unpacking your work bag, squeezing your kiddos. We hope that you engage with our action steps and our poll that we're going to be taking in just a few minutes. But other than that, we really hope that you're just getting cozy and tuning in. There's also a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. It's a little icon that you would click. And that is the best way to ask questions. Our tech team will make sure that your questions get submitted and passed on to the panelist by using that function. So don't forget about that. We'll also be using the chat function on our end, and we'll really be doing some sharing of resources there, and that's where we'll drop our links. So you might be receiving messages in the chat. And finally, we have ASL interpreters here with us tonight. They should be pinned on your screen, but if they're not for some reason, you can go ahead and pin them yourselves by clicking the 3 dots on their video feed. And we also have live transcription enabled. So to view this, you're going to click the live transcription button at the bottom of your screen and then select show subtitles. Alrighty, so to kick off the night, we just want to do a really quick poll for folks. Nothing too serious. We are just really excited to know what issues you all are interested in, honestly, the issues that are close to your heart. So we just dropped a super simple poll in the Zoom window. You just click whatever resonates with you. I think some folks might have a few different interest areas or issue areas that they're interested in, but just select one. Don't worry, we're not gonna hold you to it. We're just really interested to know about where folks are at tonight. Alrighty. We'll wrap up that poll, I think. Great, look at the results, awesome. Cool. Love the high interest in smart justice. But it looks like everything has a lot on there. So those are some of the topic areas we're going to be getting into tonight. So, don't go anywhere. We're going to be working our way through all of those areas. And we're actually going to start in the area of bodily autonomy. So the ACLU has a long history of working to uphold everyone's right to bodily autonomy, whether it's in the realm of reproductive liberty, gender justice, or the countless ways that those two things converge. It's been a big focus of this past year and beyond across the country, but also here in Vermont. Prop 5, the Reproductive Liberty Amendment, we're going to be hearing about that in a moment. But we also know that the work is far from over. And I'm really honored to turn it over to my colleague and teammate, Indy, who's going to talk about the recent piece of history made here in Vermont. And then we're also going to hear about all of the work that's still ahead for us to do together. So take it away, Indy.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jess. I'm Indy Schoenherr. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the policy advocate here at the ACLU of Vermont, and I'm so excited to be here and chatting with all of you. On November 8th, Vermont voters made history. We passed Proposal 5, the Reproductive Liberty Amendment, also known as Article 22. And this amendment enshrines reproductive autonomy as a constitutional and fundamental right for everyone in Vermont. We now have the strongest protection of abortion rights and other reproductive care in our Constitution. And just this morning, we had the opportunity to attend the signing of 2 amendments into our state's Constitution, both Prop 5 and Prop 2. And the gravity of this historical moment made me feel even more energized to continue in the work that we are doing. And in this time, I've just been reflecting on all of the feelings I've experienced at the time I worked alongside so many wonderful and dedicated people on this campaign. As I said, there are a lot of feelings, very big and very overwhelming. But most of all, I feel just immense gratitude. So when I first started my fellowship position, this work had been in movement for some time, and supporters from across the state were hard at work talking to their legislators, friends and neighbors about the importance of this amendment. And at this point, Proposal 5 had already passed through the legislature in the previous biennium. And we had one more biennium to get through, and this was the final year. So with the legislature coming on, Falco had asked me to give testimony in the State House, in the House Human Services Committee. And this would be my first time testifying ever in the legislature. I was both excited and nervous, but felt incredibly supported by my team, and I did it. With that, I did my best to answer some interesting questions, and with my cat crawling up the wall, as some of you may remember. Again, supporters like you called and emailed legislators to urge them to vote yes on the Reproductive Liberty Amendment and encouraged your community to do the same. I watched as Proposal 5 passed the House, and the final roll call vote was 107 voting yes and 41 voting no. And I recall feeling the joy and contentment of this moment and knew that more work had to be done. Then May 2nd of this year happened. The Dobbs opinion was leaked. And the fear that overcame me propelled me into more action. I had the opportunity to give a speech at the Bands Off Our Bodies rally, and together we showed those who sought to take away our bodily autonomy that we weren't backing down. I got to do more community engagement and outreach and tried to make accessible the legal jargon that clouds most of us from knowing our rights. Then inevitably, the Dobbs decision came out, and it was what we expected, thanks to the leaked opinion. And like many of you, I'm sure the sadness, tears, anger were so present, and they were so present in my body and in my mind. And this time I felt tired. It made me ask and question, what is this country we live in? But along all side of that, I was able to stay grounded in knowing that here in Vermont, we had something to work towards that showed our value of reproductive autonomy and showed the rest of the nation that we can move forward. Once again, volunteers were hard at work, knocking on doors, making phone calls, tabling at co-ops and farmers markets all over the state to make sure we passed the Reproductive Liberty Amendment. And to think 4 years of hard work coming into reality, just months after our federal constitutional right to abortion was ripped from us, is surreal. The timing of this happening in Vermont is profound and something I do not take for granted. And 77% of Vermont voters affirmed our value of reproductive autonomy for all. Not only that, but the amendment was also supported by the majority of voters in every single town in the state. A truly impressive demonstration of Vermonters' commitment to reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. So I'm just so full of gratitude and honor to have been a small part of this. And thank you to everyone who showed up and added to the collective power that made this amendment possible. And even now, I know that there is more work to be done to continue to protect our right to choose. So I'll turn it over to Falco to talk more about that work.
Thank you so much, Indy. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Indy. That was really powerful. And I really appreciate your words and sharing that inside experience, what it was like to be part of this campaign. And I agree, it was truly incredible and something I'll never forget. And the passage of the Reproductive Liberty Amendment was an incredible victory for the access to reproductive rights and the fight for bodily autonomy here and around the country. I've talked to people from as far away as California, folks in Michigan, and everywhere. It was incredible to see just what this meant when everywhere that reproductive rights were on the ballot, we won. And so from that, we know that there's still more work to be done, because we need to work to protect providers and patients who are seeking reproductive and gender affirming healthcare here in Vermont. And that part of that is because we know that other states are working just as hard to try and restrict people's access even beyond their borders. And we can't fully know exactly what other states might try and do to reach beyond their borders, to try and control the bodies and actions of peoples in states like Vermont. But we can put protections in place that provide some security and have some guesses of how they might try and do it. And these are called shield laws. So right now we're working with experts from around the country, as well as the legislative leadership, to design a package of protections for patients and providers in Vermont. And this has been a major concern of the ACLU of Vermont, as well as other ACLU affiliates around the country. And we've been doing everything we can to come together and make sure that we're both providing the strongest protections we can without providing a false sense of security, because there's only so far we can go. But we are building off lessons from other states, such as Massachusetts, New York, California, and Connecticut. And we are still ironing out the exact details of what that legislation might look like and making sure that it is as strong as possible, but also does not overreach and put us in legal hot water. But we can give you a broad overview of what these kinds of provisions would include. First would be the protection of medical licenses for medical professionals who provide legal, reproductive, and gender-affirming healthcare in Vermont. Second would be provisions that stop the state of Vermont from cooperating with investigations, civil and criminal, that sought to penalize giving or receiving reproductive or gender-affirming healthcare here in Vermont. And finally, we know that we need to also protect the information of patients and providers, because there are those who try and use the current information systems to gather that information and use it against people and try and stop them from getting the healthcare that they need. And one thing that I know is we expect strong support for these reforms in the legislature. And we are already working with others such as Planned Parenthood and the Vermont Medical Society to really come into the legislative session strong, say these are the next steps that we need to take. And we expect to see passage within this next legislative session, because we need to continue to be vigilant as new threats arise. So I want to thank you once again, Indy, for giving that really insightful speech about what it was like to be part of this campaign. I think about it daily, and seeing that our Constitution changed today and seeing our rights protected was a truly, truly momentous occasion, one I'm not going to forget. So I also want to thank everyone else who was involved in this. This has been a campaign we've been working on for years, and it could not have happened without you and the voters of Vermont who stood up and overwhelmingly said, we in Vermont protect bodily autonomy. So I want to now pass it over to Jess, who will introduce our next topic.
Hi again, everyone. Thanks, Indy and Felco. Really appreciate you both. So responding to national tides doesn't stop with bodily autonomy. Education equity is another issue area where we have been and will continue to dig in at the ACLU of Vermont. And that work is to ensure that all students in Vermont can be respected and celebrated as their full selves in school, free from harm in school, and of course, the fight to keep public dollars in public schools. So I'm going to hand it over to Indy to talk about some of the great education equity work that the ACLU has been engaged with in the past year.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. So the ACLU of Vermont has been a member of the Police Out of Schools Coalition since its inception. And this coalition is made up of several organizations, the Education and Justice Coalition of Vermont, NAACP, Rights and Democracy, and many more. And these organizations came together in the summer of 2020 to dispel the myth that Vermont schools are safer with police in them. And this coalition diligently worked to create the Police Out of Schools Toolkit, which was released in April. And I will make sure that the link is dropped in the chat for y'all to take a look at it. And this toolkit demonstrates why we need to remove police from schools and invest in student supports, and provides a tangible path to do so. And additionally, we released a response video to the Uvalde school shooting in which we affirmed that police do not make schools safer. And if you are interested in knowing what real safety is, please feel free to copy the link down and watch it when you've got some time. But just looking ahead with this coalition, we recognize that while this work is still important, we knew it was vital to expand our focus and priority to get to the root of the problem, meaning looking to the larger school culture. So this led our coalition to shift to a story collection project. And the purpose of this project is to tell the stories of harm, of identity-based bullying, harassment, and bias in schools. And with this project, we want to elevate and center student voices, define and create healing spaces, and demand systemic change. We see youth-inspired systemic change to encourage a school culture and climate that empowers and uplifts while safeguarding vulnerable students with real responsiveness and care. And we are just in the beginning stages of this project, but I'm excited to be able to uplift these stories to usher in necessary systemic change in our schools and ultimately our communities. So I'm just going to ask all of y'all to look at the Police Out of Schools Toolkit and see how you can get involved in your community with removing police from schools. And I will turn it over to Falco to talk a little bit more about education equity.
Thank you, Indy, and thank you so much for the work that everyone's been doing in community around these really important issues. I'm going to talk a little bit now more about a topic that also came up at our annual meeting that we've also heard quite a bit from our members and supporters about, and that's concerns about what is the path forward for Vermont when it comes to funding our educational system in light of the recent Supreme Court decision that limited the ability to make decisions about how our schools are funded and what institutions we are funding. So ensuring access to high quality public education has long been a priority of the ACLU Vermont. And what we should know about Vermont as we talk about this is Vermont has a somewhat unique system that relies on non-public schools to educate students in areas not served by public institutions. And for years, our state has paid public tuition to independent schools while trying to maintain safeguards that stop public dollars from being used to fund religious instruction. As I said before, this summer, the US Supreme Court issued a decision about a similar education funding system that exists in Maine. That basically said, in the simplest terms, that states could no longer exclude religious institutions from receiving public funding if public dollars were going to be going to independent schools. So, let me be clear, this is a seismic shift in how the court balances the right to freely express one's religion and protections against the government establishment of religion. As a result of what's called the Carson decision, the U.S. Supreme Court has put Vermont in a very difficult position as it seeks to both comply with the court's decision while upholding our core democratic values and traditions. And what I will say is, while the court has narrowed the range of workable policy solutions that are now available for separating church and state, as is called for in our state constitution, there is no question that Vermont can and must do more to ensure that all students can receive high-quality education free from discrimination. So we've had a lot of people ask, how do we do this? What is that path forward, and what does that look like? And I'll say that in the simplest terms, we can uphold these values by ensuring that public dollars go to public schools. It's that simple. Or at the very least, go to schools that follow the same rules as public schools. And that's exactly what we're going to be asking the legislature to do this session. We're committed to working with stakeholders and policymakers in the upcoming legislative biennium to chart a path forward that complies with a radically shifting Supreme Court precedent while upholding our core democratic values and traditions, including a public education system that is well-funded and is equitable. We know that instituting these reforms will not be easy, but Vermont can and must rise to the challenge in front of us, even if it requires us to examine how we've done things in the past and make some difficult decisions and have some tough conversations with our friends and neighbors. And you'll be hearing much more from us on this and the work we do with legislators this coming session. So please stay tuned. And I was very heartened to see the number of people who see education issues as something that's core to what you come and bring to your work with the ACLU. So we're looking forward to you standing with us. You'll hear much more about that this session, but this is going to be top of our agenda as we head into this legislative session. So I will now kick it back to Jess one more time to introduce our next policy topic.
Awesome. Thank you both so much again. And I have 2 kiddos at home, so I'm always grateful for all the work the ACLU does, but specifically all the work we're going to be doing around education equity. So thanks, everyone out there. So now we're going to shift a little bit and talk about some of our issue areas that fall under smart justice, which I know a lot of folks out there were interested in digging into. So smart justice is a flagship ACLU campaign committed to transforming the nation's criminal legal system and building a new vision for community well-being. This year, we're actually celebrating 5 years of smart justice work in Vermont, which is huge. So I'm going to actually turn it back to Falco to talk about some of the great work that we've done these past 5 years.
Thanks so much, Jess, and thanks for bringing me back again. Wasn't gone very long. But so I'm going to look back a little bit on our smart justice campaign and also some of the work that we've been doing around policing in our communities. So the ACLU Vermont has long been a leader on issues of community safety and policing. And we've seen some really significant victories in recent years, especially in the last couple of years. These include passing the nation's strongest restrictions on the use of unnecessary force. We put these into law in 2020. We became the first state in the nation to prohibit the use of facial recognition software by law enforcement. And we also just this last year established the Division of Racial Justice Statistics, a newly created body that would work to identify and help eliminate the persistent racial disparities that exist in our criminal legal system and are actually some of the worst in the country. And I will say that as someone who's worked on these issues in the State House year after year, often one of the things that I keep hearing is, well, that might happen other places, but it doesn't happen in Vermont. When we have that data and we have that information, we can tell that story in ways that resonate along with the stories of people who've been directly impacted. So we're hoping with those two paired together, we can bring forward even stronger advocacy in the future. And I will say that while efforts to reimagine the appropriate role of law enforcement in our communities saw significant progress in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, we are now facing a strong and coordinated attack on those gains. And it's driven by fear and misinformation and a desire to return to the failed tough on crime policies of the past, driven by those who want to defend the status quo. Last year, we saw those forces galvanize in opposition to efforts to remove barriers to justice for victims of police misconduct, such as eliminating qualified immunity in Vermont. We also saw a number of proposed reforms, such as creating a public database of untrustworthy cops, stopping unnecessary traffic stops, banning no-knock raids, and using false information to coerce confessions fall by the wayside after strong and coordinated opposition from law enforcement. Many of those bills are actually going to be coming back up again this session, because what happened is that lawmakers were not ready to move forward because they said, we need more information. We need to study this. So while that might not have been the progress we wanted last year, we are not giving up and we are redoubling our efforts. And we know this is especially important in this current climate. Anyone who watched any TV during the election here in Vermont or around the country saw a tough on crime narrative dominating the airwaves. And this is something that is against what we know the people of Vermont want. The people of Vermont want proven solutions and a smart approach to community safety. We've seen this bear out in poll after poll, as well as the election of progressive prosecutors. And that's why we're going to continue to call on Vermont leaders to reimagine the appropriate role of police in our communities, to hold law enforcement accountable for misconduct. So this is something that we've been talking quite a lot about, and we've had to be very vocal about, because we are pushing back against a narrative that's painting Vermont as a place that just isn't safe, where people can't trust their friends and neighbors. And what we really need to do is not only talk about what's the appropriate role of law enforcement in our communities, which we will continue to do, we also need to talk about what are those solutions. How do we get to the root causes of crime and discontent in our communities? And how do we make sure people have the supports and services they need? Because that's how we actually get real community safety. So I'm going to be now passing it over to Indy to tell a little bit more about what we're going to be working on this year. But trust me, you're going to be hearing quite a bit from us on this in the next for a while to come.
Yes, the work is endless when it comes to reducing unnecessary interactions between community members and law enforcement, and also just clarifying the role of law enforcement in our communities. And I am so grateful that we have an opportunity to bring these back up this session and really get clear about what we need here in Vermont to address a lot of the issues we are experiencing. So we identified two areas to begin. First, starting with unnecessary traffic stops. We know that Black Vermonters are 4 times more likely to be stopped and 3 times more likely to be searched during a traffic stop than white Vermonters. We also know that Black drivers are more likely than white drivers to be pulled over for equipment violations, such as broken taillights or an obscured license plate, things that do not affect the safety of other motorists, which we call non-public safety stops. And data shows that Vermont roads are over-policed. In 2020, data showed that Vermont stop rates fell from 318 to 187 per 1,000 residents. However, this is still well above the pre-COVID national average, which I believe is 81 stops per 1,000 residents. And although stops were reduced overall, the racial disparities widened. For example, Essex County Sheriff's Department reduced stops of white drivers by 22%, but increased stops of Black drivers by 250%. And yes, you heard me correctly, by 250%, which is outrageous. In Brandon, stops of white drivers fell by 61%, but stops of Black drivers increased by 71%. So we can directly confront some of the stark racial disparities we have witnessed by clarifying and limiting law enforcement's ability to pull people over for non-public safety-related stops. And for example, in Chittenden County, they are declining prosecution from non-public safety traffic stops. And with the implementation of this policy, we saw the number of Black drivers being stopped in Burlington drop by approximately a quarter. So from 10.6% to 7.3%. And we know that there's a lot of work to do to lower racial disparities. And this policy is just one mechanism of many. But this data shows that when we proactively limit the types of stops, we can help lower disparities in our communities by reducing unnecessary interactions between law enforcement officers and members of our community. So this is why we're supporting legislation that will be introduced this upcoming session that will reduce unnecessary non-public safety traffic stops. And you will hear more from us on that as the legislature moves forward. And the second area that we identified was disorderly conduct. We envision communities that prioritize community security for all. And this is hard to do when laws are being used disproportionately, to disproportionately impact Black and Brown people in the state and people with marginalized experiences. So in Vermont, the disorderly conduct statutes as is, they're incredibly broad and unconstitutional because they criminalize actions and speech that are protected under our First Amendment. And this landscape provides officers with broad discretion to interact with community members. Rachel Morin, a scholar around disorderly conduct, says giving police officers substantial discretion over whom to charge and punish invites discriminatory enforcement. So one of the best ways to reduce the abuse of discretion is to limit the scope of the law itself. And we are currently working with our legal team to examine options to reform our disorderly conduct statutes to protect people engaging in constitutionally protected activity and to limit law enforcement overreach. And we know that these are not the only solutions to help reimagine the role of police, but we know that they will have an impact at reducing disparities and harms that we see today. Another area that we're looking at, there are a lot of reforms regarding accountability and the role of police and communities. And one of the top ones at our list is community control of meaningful oversight of law enforcement officers. Vermont residents deserve law enforcement that operate in accordance with constitutional standards to make our communities secure places where we all can feel a sense of belonging and thrive to our fullest potential. And instead, people feel unsafe around police, especially BIPOC Vermonters, due to the disparate treatment. And the inability for communities to hold police accountability has resulted in deep distrust for law enforcement. So community oversight of law enforcement is one way to repair this rift. And these community control bodies are bodies of non-police community members that will help inform police policy, practice, and accountability measures for law enforcement in their municipality. So again, it focuses on the community members and gives them the ability to hold the police accountable within their community. So these meaningful community control boards enable community members to review and investigate public complaints of police misconduct. And so we are asking legislators to remove the constraints around community control and give our communities the authority to review the actions of local police departments and officers. And there's a whole list of things that I could go on and on about, but those are the ones that I'll focus on for tonight. And I'll pass it back to Falco.
Thank you so much, Indy. I appreciate that. And as you said, there's many, many more things that we could be looking at and working at. Some of the things that I talked about in my section earlier are going to continue to come up. We expect there to be discussions of, should we ban no-knock raids? Do we need a public database that looks at what cops who are untrustworthy and how can we make sure that communities know about that. And so we expect there to be a lot of work coming in the next year, and we're going to be needing your help with all of it, because as we said before, we've been facing a coordinated campaign to push back against these reforms by law enforcement and defenders of the status quo. But we know that Vermonters want communities that feel safe, and we know that safety comes when we address the root causes of crime and not just look at the failed tough on crime policies of the past. I'd also like to talk a little bit about our work around prisons and our Smart Justice campaign, which has been our flagship campaign for a number of years, where we've actually seen a pretty significant progress, even though there's more work to be done, which I guess continues to be a theme with a lot of the stuff we're talking about tonight. So 2023 will mark the 5-year anniversary of the launch of the ACLU Vermont's Smart Justice campaign. And this campaign has two main goals. First is reduce Vermont's prison population by 50% from its peak, and then also to combat the racial disparities that exist in our criminal legal system, and especially in our prison system that is over-incarcerating people of color at grossly disproportionate rates. And we have seen some progress to those goals, thanks in part to coordinated cost government initiatives like Justice Reinvestment, and then the continued advocacy of the ACLU in Vermont and our members. One of the most exciting and top line numbers that I want to share with everyone all the time when we talk about this work is Vermont's prison population has been reduced by 40% since the start of the pandemic. Our peak was 2,200 people, and we're now down around 1,300 people incarcerated by the state of Vermont. This is something a lot of people said couldn't happen and couldn't be done, but we've done it. And we've done that through a number of smart reforms, like not holding people for nonviolent drug offenses, and then also looking at our community supervision system. So that is where we've seen some of the biggest gains in the most recent years, because significantly fewer people are returned to prison for violations of community supervision. And this is something that I often have to spend a little bit of time explaining to people, because it's not something people hear about all the time. Vermont has a somewhat unique system where we use what's called furlough as a way to get people out of jail sooner, but also keep very strong oversight, sometimes unnecessarily strong oversight of those people. And when people mess up and do things that are not new crimes, but technical violations, they're often returned to prison for sometimes very long periods of time. When working with the Nonpartisan Council of State Governments, they looked at our system and said, all right, how can we work in a smarter fashion to reduce the prison population? And the number one thing that they identified is we needed to reform the system, because approximately 80% of new prison admissions were being driven by people being brought back from community supervision, as opposed to creating new crimes. It was just people who had violations and then were being returned for long periods of time. And within this furlough system, other places, furlough is usually thought of as something people getting to go have a few days to go to a funeral or something like this. People can be on furlough for years and years and years. And different from systems like parole, they don't have due process rights to appeal those decisions to reincarcerate them. So what we've done is we put due process rights in place for people who are on furlough and are being returned for longer interrupts, so they can actually have the right to challenge that. We also are transitioning to a system called presumptive parole, because within the parole system, you have more rights, more ability to appeal. And what presumptive parole means is that it presumes that people should be released after serving their minimum sentence, unless it can be shown that they're a threat to community safety. Another major reform that we enacted, which is helping reduce the number of people who are incarcerated, is allowing the people incarcerated by the state of Vermont to earn time off their sentences for good behavior. This is something the state of Vermont did away with in an effort called Truth in Sentencing, that they said, well, if we don't have this where people can earn time off their sentences, the sentences will go down and people will be incarcerated for shorter periods of time. And that just didn't happen. So this was another one of the main recommendations of the Council of State Governments in terms of ways that we could keep people in prison for shorter periods of time when they don't need to be. And we saw a number of, we saw quite a lot of progress during the pandemic itself. We saw our numbers get as low into the low 1200s. And part of that was being driven because less people were being held pre-charge, so being held without bail or held pre-sentencing before they've been convicted of a crime. We're starting to see those numbers creep back up again, and that's a major concern. And that's a lot of it that has to do with backlogs in the system and people being more willing to incarcerate people, even though they might not pose a risk to public safety at that moment in time. And we're also seeing a renewed push to expand our prison system through new construction. And that is of great concern to the ACLU of Vermont. We know that facilities like the Chittenden Regional Facility do not meet the needs of people incarcerated there and support improving their living conditions. But at the same time, we're strongly opposed to plans for new prison construction that would increase the footprint of our prison system unnecessarily. And because simply put, if we build it, we will fill it. We also have really very real concerns that the focus on new prison construction ignores community-based alternatives to incarceration. Will put supports and services that people need to reintegrate into their communities behind prison walls and far from those communities that they need to go back and become a part of. Because we do not have, almost everyone who is incarcerated in Vermont will be returning to their communities someday. So we need to make sure we have those supports and services there for them when they're going to do it. And this is why we're working with a coalition of advocates and direct service providers to call on the legislature to invest in people, not prisons, and stop the expansion of Vermont's prison footprint. And we'll have an opportunity to do that just this year. We know the Department of Corrections is going to be coming forward and asking for a multi-million-dollar bill to help them site a new prison. But we're going to say we need to slow this process down and really think about how we can be smarter with our criminal legal system and make sure people have the supports they need and not assume that we can build off of the broken systems of the past. So I think with that, I know we're running a little bit ahead of time, and I think that gives us a little bit more time to answer some of your questions. So I'd like to bring Jess back, and maybe we can dig into some of the stuff that you've all asked. And also, I will once again say, please, this is a call for questions. Please put them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer any burning questions you might have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Felco and Indy. Indy, you can come on back too for our Q&A. I just really appreciate you both diving deep and giving us a glimpse into all of the work ahead. We clearly have so much to celebrate and also have so much to get ready for. So that's really exciting. I know I'm feeling inspired and eager, but before we talk about taking action, I want to make sure we have time to answer folks' questions. So just another reminder to drop your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We've had a few roll in already. So let's start there. So we've had a few questions tonight and from registration asking, what is the ACLU doing to further trans rights and support the trans community in Vermont? Indy, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. We have been working with a couple of other organizations, Pride Center, Outright, and Out in the Open, to get clear on how we can best protect queer and trans youth and just folks in general in this state. And so as the ACLU, we're coming in and really wanting to uplift and support the work that is being done at these other organizations who are more on the grounds and really in it. So right now we are just doing our best to support all of that work and just be in coalition with all the advocates who care about trans youth.
Yeah, I'm happy to build off of that as well, because this is something that I know is going to be a discussion in the legislature. When we talk about education policy, trying to make sure that our public dollars are funding institutions that don't discriminate is another way that we can help protect trans youth in the state. Making sure that schools are held to the same high standards as other public accommodations, and then making sure that we bring to light instances of hazing, harassment, and bullying that are occurring throughout our state. So Indy spoke to quite a bit of the great work that they are doing with others as part of the Police Out of Schools Coalition and other places, and the story collection projects that are happening there. So this is an issue that's going to be coming up in the legislature. We expect this to be a hot topic of discussion within the education committees. But also what we're doing is we're listening to community members and trying to hear what their needs are and support them as they're going through really scary situations that are heartbreaking, because no one deserves to feel targeted because of who they are. And that's exactly what's happening in a number of our schools. And we've seen national attention brought to this, trying to shame people from expressing their gender identity in the ways that they deserve to, and they have every right to. And so that's one of the things that we want to do is continue to advocate for changes in the laws where necessary, advocate for upholding practices that are already within the law, and then standing with community members when they ask us for help and offering that support when we possibly can. So, thanks, Indy, for that. And thank you so much for that question.
Awesome. Love that. A few more have rolled in. So there are currently Vermonters incarcerated in Mississippi. Are there plans to advocate against the sending of prisoners to other states?
I'm happy to jump in and take that question. We oppose sending prisoners out of state to private prisons, because not only are they being shipped like halfway across the country, they're being housed in a private institution that is profiting off the incarceration of Vermonters. And so what do we need to do to end that? The number one thing we need to do is reduce Vermont's prison population. And that's one of the core tenets of our Smart Justice campaign. So that's why we are bringing forward reforms to try and reduce that prison population. Though we are also open to some of these discussions around funding and how can we better use public funds to make sure that we don't need to send prisoners there. How can we use existing facilities we already have within the state and better appropriate them so we don't have to engage in these practices? So it is a complex problem, but I think the simplest answer is we can push back against sending prisoners out of state by reducing the number of people we incarcerate in the first place. And that includes the reforms that we already talked about. And one of the biggest areas where we've seen some progress, but not nearly enough in the last couple of years in the legislature, is sentencing reform. We know that sentencing and the harsh non-crime sentences that have been on our books for years are one of the biggest drivers to our over-incarceration problem here in Vermont and around the country. And we've seen those efforts. We saw some really strong efforts come out of the House in the last 2 years, but then they just fell short and didn't even get the airtime in the Senate. So we need to keep pushing back on that, especially now when we're hearing that from many politicians that their answer to the struggles our communities are facing is more criminalization. So we need to be pushing back on that now, and then actually pushing forward with solutions that get at the root causes of crime and making sure that we're not holding people unnecessarily in our prisons.
I want to jump in. We're supposed to be moving on and wrapping up, but what you were saying, Falco, just spoke to another question that we've had from a few different folks, and it's asking just that, kind of in light of all of the media attention around addressing, or the media attention around crime and addressing public narratives and concerns. I wonder if you'll kind of quickly speak to, even though it's not a quick topic, we've been talking about the root causes of crime, but what are they, and what are some of what we're doing to address those root causes and find solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jess. And for those who like listening to VPR, I do suggest that you tune in at 7 o'clock after this. You can hear our executive director, James Duff-Lyle, speak to this. He was the guest today on Vermont Edition and articulated this extremely well with a lot more time to talk about it than I can. But what we're saying is that Vermont has underinvested in our communities for years. And then the problems that communities were facing were only exacerbated by the pandemic. And that is what's leading leading to some of the problems we're seeing in communities today and the public safety challenges we're having. When people do not have the resources they need, that's what can lead to crime. So we are saying, and we actually just delivered a message to the governor asking him in his budget to prioritize funding things that we know help support eliminating the root causes of public safety concerns. So those include a couple things. One, it includes housing, investing in housing, making sure people have a place to live, which is something where we know that housing is incredibly unaffordable here in Vermont, and something needs to be addressed in a number of ways, both through investments and as well as reforming our existing laws around development. We also need to see increased investment in our mental health system, making sure that people have mental health supports, and also looking at innovative approaches such as mental health first responders that are decoupled from a law enforcement response, so people can get the care that they need without having the fear of calling law enforcement or the escalation that can come with interactions with law enforcement. We also need to create more funding for our substance abuse and misuse systems. That includes investing in our existing hub and spoke system, as well as things like investing in making innovative alternatives such as overdose prevention sites and other innovative approaches to public health and safety. And then also, as I talked about earlier, we need to be investing in our education system to help people get that leg up they need to stay involved in our communities, to find those jobs that they need, and to make sure that they're supported as they transition into adulthood and can become more productive members of our society. So I think Jess will have an opportunity to, if you feel strongly about these things as we do, I think Jess will have an opportunity for you to take action on that in just a few minutes.
Amazing. You're so right. So before we dive into that, I just want to thank you both, Indy and Falco, for hanging out with us. Yeah, it's always a joy, and you two are two of the smartest people I know. So thanks for hanging out. And we have a few minutes left before our time is up. So I want to talk about taking action. And just as Falco was saying, all of the things that we heard about tonight have root causes that can be mitigated by investing in our communities. And it's essential that we let Vermont leadership and Governor Scott know that making meaningful investments in our communities is important to us, the ACLU supporters. So many folks might know, but Governor Scott has requested comments related to the fiscal year 2024 state budget. As Falco just mentioned, our ACLU team submitted an official comment just last week, and we would love you all to do the same. So there is going to be a link dropped in the chat right now, and folks can hop on our website using that link and submit a comment. The link will take you to a form letter. There's also opportunity in that form letter to write words of your own. So whatever you're most comfortable with. And we really urge you to do this tonight. We know that time's moving fast. We're getting close to the end of the year. So don't wait. So you'll get the link right now in the chat, and then we'll also send it in a post-panel email, and you can also find it on our website. So it's really important that we let our state leaders know what's important to us and our communities. So we really hope that you'll do that with us. And the second action I'd love you all to take tonight, because there's two and you can do them both, is to get involved with us, with the ACLU of Vermont. So I know you all are supporters. You probably receive our emails by now. If you don't, of course, sign up for those, but I'm assuming a lot of you do. So all of the things we talked about tonight, we're going to build power around these issues and more in the coming year. And we really want to keep you in the loop. So by completing the form that is about to be dropped in the chat, you can let us know just how you want to be involved moving forward, right? From getting invited to events we have, volunteering your time, or meeting us at the State House on important days. All of those are different ways to stay connected to us in our work. And as Indy mentioned, with the passing of the Reproductive Liberty Amendment, it took all of us, right? It took volunteers, supporters from across the state to make history together. So we're excited to keep doing that with you, to continue that. So just fill out the simple form that's going to be dropped in the chat. And I'll actually be the one to reach out to you when the time is right. So again, both links are in the chat. You're going to be getting them in a post-panel email. And you'll also be getting my personal email dropped in the chat. So if you have any questions or concerns about our work, staying connected to us and getting involved, you can always reach out to me personally, and I would be happy to chat, happy to meet you and get to know you more. Okay, well, with that, we are going to be wrapping up here, but I promised y'all a giveaway. So we have a super sweet swag bag, which I was hoping to hold up on screen, but I forgot it in the other room, so I apologize. But it's filled with ACLU of Vermont t-shirts, mugs. The actual bag is part of the giveaway. And we also have a really amazing print that is a custom collaboration between the ACLU, Alchemist Brewing Company, and a local artist, all about people power. So that's included in the swag bag and some other ACLU goodies. So I'm going to work with our tech team and Google's random number generator to see who our lucky winner is. Oh, look at this special delivery, ACLU of Vermont swag bag, everyone. And the swag bag goes to Julie Kalish. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but congratulations. Woohoo! So I will reach out to you via email to make a plan to get you your swag. So excited for you and excited to work together more, Julie. So thanks everyone for participating in the giveaway by being here tonight. And I just want to thank everyone for hanging out with us. We're so grateful for your time and your energy. There's so many folks who have been longtime supporters of our work, and we know that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. And of course, there is always room for more. So we can't wait to stay connected and to get to work with you all in the new year. So thanks so much. Have a lovely night, and we'll see you soon. Bye, friends.